What's up, my wizards? It's Deb from Mtg. We like it of magic, and you know, a lot of people really like big creatures, and I don't blame them. I got a thing for big, humongous creatures too. But you know what doesn't get enough attention? Small creatures. Oh, but don't worry, Ziggy. You're still my number one. Yeah, you were here first. But in any case, yeah, we're playing all 4 copies of this card, basing the thing around it, so we want to find it every game if we possibly can. At the same time, we want to make sure that we can win a game even if we don't see this card. So this is really more of just a baseline mono-red aggro deck that tries to go as low as possible, both in terms of converted mana cost and budget. Now, from the first time I saw this card, I knew that I wanted to brew around it, not only because of, like, the obvious deck building potential. It's pretty interesting for that reason, but like, look at the art. Like, you got the huge dude wearing the trapper mask from Dead by Daylight. You got the dudes doing flippy stuff up top. You got the fire breathing guys riding murder bikes down there. It's ridiculous. This card is ridiculous, just in terms of flavor, but also in terms of function too. It turns out there's a lot of stuff you can do in this format, and for the last month or so I've been throwing a bunch of different things at the wall, but it turns out best thing you can do, just go straight mono red. Keep the consistency up and try to go as low as possible so you can be as aggressive as you need to be. Now, to help this card snap off as much as possible and create as much damage as we can with it, we got to play a bunch of 1-drops in the deck. We obviously want a 1-drop on turn 1, but a bunch of our early sequences require like 2 1-drops on turn 2, or maybe Cavalcade and a 1-drop on 3. So obviously we got to play a bunch of early drops, and I think the best one for the deck is actually Footlight Fiend. Every little bit of damage counts in this deck. We're trying to finish things off as quickly as possible, and Hotfoot piles damage on top of damage on top of damage, and it attacks well because of Calamity in this deck, but it also protects pretty well too. You know, this can be defensive when you need it to be. Whenever it blocks something, even if it dies, make that creature walk across the coals, deal an extra damage so it can take out like 2 toughness creatures in combat. Pretty good for your 1-drop. So this card is decent on attacks and on defense, and I just think it's one of the best 1-drops we could possibly play. But so is Fanatical Firebrand. This is actually one of the best 1-drops in the format at large, just period right now. It too, attack and protect, you know. Go ahead and drop your double F-bomb on turn 1, you can go ahead and get to swinging in really, really fast. Haste creatures are good in this deck, because if you have a Calamity down and you play a Fanatical Firebrand, well, you're dealing 2 damage with it that turn, some of the time, but you're at least dealing the 1 damage, guaranteed when you get that attack trigger from Calamity. But this too, another good defensive creature in a format right now where mono blue aggro is really, really on the rise, and this can kill Mistcloaked Herald, Terramander in the early game, which is when they're going to be playing it most of the time, and Siren Stormtamer as well. So it kills a bunch of creatures in that deck, but it also can kill Llanowar Elves, and sometimes Adanto Vanguard, at least make them pay the 4 life, you know. Legion's Landing tokens, Healer's Hawks, all kinds of stuff. So just the ability to tap and kill a thing is pretty good right now. But we're also playing 4 copies of Mistcloaked Goblin. 10th Street Dodger, you know, this is just able to go unblocked, and that's really, really good. And this deck, shouldn't have to tell you, this is actually another one of the better 1-drops of the deck. Just mono red has a lot of really good 1-cost creatures for this thing. Yeah, it requires a little bit of mana, but usually we don't feel bad paying 1 mana to essentially make this go unblocked. We don't have to worry about too many defender creatures in the format right now. And once Cavalcade drops, this thing gets particularly dangerous. You know, your opponent kind of has prioritized killing her, and it's 2 free damage every single turn, pretty much guaranteed, and that's nothing to sneeze at. I like Doyer. But we are saving some room for some 2-drop dudes in the deck, so we're playing 4 copies of Goblin Instigator, of course. You know, we want bodies in this deck, and we want them quickly, so 2 mana for 2 bodies is a great deal. You know, it's kind of okay, even if you never draw a Calamity. Again, we want stuff like that, and while Instigator isn't the best card in the world, it kind of can hold its own in most games. It's kind of a sapling migration that you can't kick, which is totally fine for our purposes here. But once again, once Cavalcade does come down, you've created a lot of value. You know, 2 mana, 2 bodies, 2 guaranteed damage, even if the creatures actually get blocked. It's actually really relevant starting on turn 3, 4, 5. but I'm also playing 3 copies of Wily Goblin in the deck. I'm trying to drive down the land count as much as I possibly can here, and at first I was playing Skirk Prospector instead of Footlight Fiend to kind of get a goblin payoff. In the main deck, there's a lot of goblins, if you haven't noticed, but usually you don't want to sacrifice guys to Skirk Prospector. It's like 1 or 2 a game that you might sacrifice, and it just wasn't worth it when compared to a card like Fiend, but Wily Goblin is still definitely a mana accelerant that should be in the deck, and I'm thinking about pushing it to 4 copies. I think you might be able to get away with it and play an even lower land count, but in the end, I chickened out. I'm just playing 3 copies of Wily Goblin here. Now, there are a few cards in this deck that cost 3 mana, but the only actual 3-drop is Goblins the Gathering. We're playing 4 copies of this card because it's awesome at most points in the game. You know, the first copy on turn 3, not bad. 2 bodies on the battlefield, a 3-mana Instigator, again, not the best thing ever, but once you play your second copy, getting, you know, a Hordling Outburst, you know, 3 goblins is actually really, really good for a deck like this. And if you can go like turn 3 Gathering, turn 4 Gathering, and a turn 5 Calamity, that's a pretty serious play sequence. So it actually gives us a little bit of late game resiliency too, some punch, you know, on turn 7 or 8. The third copy doesn't sound super good, but if we've got a Calamity out, sometimes this can equate to a guaranteed lightning bolt when those tokens actually do get to attack. But sometimes they can just like block for you, stall the game out a little bit. A lot of things you can do with this a little bit later on in the game, and you can't really say that about too many of our cards. But there are some spells in the deck. You know, we got to play some Boyne, some different card advantage elements and such. We do have to play a fairly high creature count in here to get as much value off of Calamity as we can, obviously, but there's just too many good spells to pass up. So I'm going to play 4 copies of Shock to start things off. Shock doesn't necessarily have to go in the main deck, but I think it's a mistake not to play it right now. I've already talked about how, you know, mono blue aggro is such an important deck. It kind of hoses the other really good decks in the format right now. You know, it's specifically good against Sultai, and Sultai is maybe the best deck in the format, bar none. And mono blue just has this incredible matchup against not only it, but also the Nexus decks. You know, it has a lot of counterspell elements that are really good against that. A lot of tempo elements that are good against Nexus decks. And I know Nexus is banned on Arena, but not in paper, so you know you still got to worry about Nexus in some arenas. That was probably the wrong word there, but in any case, you know, mono blue is a really important deck right now, and Shock just decimates that deck, as well as, you know, blue white aggro. It's really, really good against that deck, and blue white is another deck that's kind of rising up the ranks. The format is kind of trying to adjust, and fast decks are winning a little bit more now, and tempo-based decks are especially good. And both blue-white and especially mono-blue can claim to be kind of aggro tempo-y decks. So with that in mind, a card like Shock that punishes, you know, other early drops, really, really good right now. And I know I've devoted a lot of time to talking about Shock, but I think that it's kind of really important right now, surprisingly. We're also playing 4 copies of Skewer the Critics, but you probably knew that. You know, Calamity is actually a pretty good spectacle enabler, so I think we get the chance to play a bunch of spectacle cards in this deck. 8 in total, but the best ones. You already know what the next one is, but Skewer is obviously a sorcery speed lightning bolt most of the time in this deck. Works really well with cards like 10th Street Dodger too, I should point that out. And we're going so wide with cards like Instigator and Goblin Gathering that usually we can enable spectacle even if we don't have a Calamity. And it's in the relative late game, you know, turn 5, turn 6. We absolutely have to enable Spectacle to make sure we can pop off that last 3 damage that we need to finish a game, you know. It's not too hard to make sure we get a guy or 2 through. So 9 times out of 10 we're going to play this for 1 mana, but we kind of don't mind playing it for 3 mana when we absolutely have to, and it's a good reach piece for that purpose. But just like Shock, we need a little bit of defense in this deck to hold down the early game, and this can kill all the stuff in mono blue, mono white, blue white aggro, you know, all that stuff I've been talking about, but it can even kill like small to middling Hydroid Crasises and stuff too, so an important card, definitely. Too many people play Krasis for 4. I don't know about you, but it happens to me all the time, so just punish them with Skewer the Critics and Shock when that does happen. But we're also playing 4 copies of Light Up the Stage, you already knew that. You know, this is actually the most expensive card in the entire deck, but sometimes you just gotta light it up, you know? 2 cards is an awful lot. That is straight up card advantage. And with how low the curve is here, we're almost guaranteed to cast those cards next turn, you know. Sometimes we'll even cast both of them the same turn we play Light Up the Stage. Like Lups can come in on our second main phase after combat and just draw us effectively 2 extra cards. And again, sometimes we can play them right then and there. Like, this is just crazy. I mean, like, everyone knows it by now. I've been trying to tell you. I mean, I think everyone knew on some level, but I feel like a lot of players that take the game really seriously were like, this is just fine, you know. It's going to be a 3 of in some burn decks or whatever, and that's going to be it. Probably not going to see play outside of that. But no, I think that Lups is good enough to see play in almost any red deck that can even sort of reliably trigger Spectacle. And even when you don't trigger Spectacle, it's effectively a divination, which is just fine half the time anyway too. So just you got to play live to the stage. I think it's actually one of the most important cards in the entire deck. But to kind of tie everything together here, I'm going to play 2 copies of the Flame of Keld to finish the deck off. Don't worry, there's more to talk about. I know you're probably like, where is a specific card? We'll get to it. But in any case, I'm playing Flame of Keld over a 4 or 5 mana card that you might put in this slot, because again, I want to keep the curve as low as possible and keep the land count as low as possible right now too, you know, especially against decks like Esper, Sultai, and other Hydroid Grixis decks, Temur Reclamation and stuff like that. There are really slow roll decks in the format, and that's why decks like Mono Blue and Blue White are starting to pick up steam, you know. How low can you go? You want to beat people as quickly as you possibly can. So with that in mind, I think that it's really important to, again, keep things as low as we can. This is a card draw tool for only 2 mana. Most times when we play it, we're going to be out of cards in our hand anyway, so we won't even feel Chapter 1. And again, it's a reason I don't want to play 4 and 5 mana cards, is because I don't want to risk, you know, discarding high cost stuff to this if we want to play it on turn 3 or 4. So keep that in mind. But also, what we're really in for here is the 3rd chapter, obviously. Not only does it make burn like Shock and Skewer a lot better right off the rip, but it makes Calamity ridiculous. If you even have like 3 creatures out and you've gotten to the 3rd chapter of Flame of Keld, I know, buddy, that's 9 damage. Because Calamity's going to do 3 damage per trigger in that case. And if any creatures get through for combat damage, they'll end up doing 3 a pop as well. Like 10 Street Dodger suddenly does 3 damage when it's unblocked. So yeah, Flame of Keld, even though it takes a little bit of work to get to the 3rd chapter, you know, you have to wait a couple of turns, and sometimes that's not exactly where you want to be, but when it does pop off, it's the best piece of reach in the deck, and it's going to finish off games really, really quickly. Again, just 2-3 creatures out and a Skewer the Critics, and you've won. Now here are the lands. There's 19 mountains. That's it, you know. That's all the lands. You don't even have to jazz this up in any way. There's just 19 mountains. Play 19 mountains. Now, Mono Red actually has a lot more sideboard options than you might think. There's the Siege Gang Commander you might have been thinking of when I was talking about Flame of Keld as the last card in the deck. Now, I'm scared of discarding a 5-mana card to Flame of Keld. You know, they just don't really play well together. But in longer games or games of Flame of Keld, it's not the best card. You know, the Siege Gang Commander is a great way to pay off all these goblins that we're playing. It's a good piece of in-game reach. The 1/1s that it makes play well with Calamity. You know, when I was playing Skirk Prospector in the deck, I was playing Siege Gang in the main deck too. But again, Skirk Prospector didn't pay off very well. And honestly, you have to play so many lands in the main deck if you're playing Siege Gang. Even with a Skirk Prospector, that sometimes you flood, and this deck really does not want to flood. So it just wasn't worth playing Siege Gang in the main deck at the end of the day. But again, in longer games, this is a great sync, a great piece of reach, and the 1/1s work really, really well with Calamity. Now, there's a bunch of other spicy stuff in here, like Dual Shot. I actually think this is good right now, too. Like I mentioned earlier, Mistcloaked Herald, Terramander, Siren Stormtamer, Adanto Vanguard, even, you know, Healer's Hawk, Hunted Witness, I guess, if you want to go there. But there's a bunch of Lawnmower Elves. There's just a ton of 1 toughness creatures in this format right now. Even with Chain Whirler kind of being everywhere, people are still deigning to play 1 mana or 1 toughness guys. So Dual Shot is actually a really good budget alternative to Goblin Chain Whirler that still keeps the curve really low. So I've tried it out here, and when it does pay off, it pays off really well. So a couple of copies of that. But also Diamond Mare, a 1-power creature for Calamity when it does need to attack. It's also pretty decent against the burn decks in the format that are just trying to race you. It's going to be a really good ally in the race against other fast decks. So Diamond Mare's in there, but we got another horse, Thunder Horse, Lightning Mare here. This is really good against control. Even if it's not 1 power and it won't snap off Calamity, I kind of don't care. It's just so good against control. Can't be countered. We're going to be playing this card. So 3 copies of that. But also Hijack. Yeah, there's a mountain in the deck. That's because we're playing Siege Gang Commander in the sideboard, so we're playing a mountain in the board as well. Just want to get to that. But Hijack, another cool inclusion here. We obviously get outclassed by big creatures. Lyra Dawnbringer completely ruins our day, but so does stuff like Hydroid Grixis. You know, that gains life and is usually a pretty big creature. But if we can Hijack either one of those things, Lyra or Hydroid Krasis or Doom Whisper, a Niv Mizzet, whatever, then we can just end games right then and there. So in games where we know we're playing against big dudes, especially like flying big guys and stuff, then Hijack is just kind of amazing. It comes out of nowhere to finish games. Now, there's a bunch of stuff I didn't play in this deck, and there's a few different ideas that I want to get to. First of all, there's Tillinally Summoner. I know a lot of people will probably comment, why didn't you play this card? It's actually pretty simple, Jack. First of all, it doesn't work the way you want it to, you know? It turns out that creatures that come into play tapped and attacking do not trigger Cavalcade of Calamity. So Tillinally Summoner is kind of bad. You know, first of all, you have to play it, wait until the next turn for it to attack, dump all your mana into it, and then wait until the next turn for the dudes it created that actually survived to attack to finally get the bonus damage off of Calamity. So it just didn't turn out to be worth it in this deck. I do have a deck in the works where I'm playing Summoner as kind of the main piece in the deck. Get ready for that. There are other ideas I had to expand the different colors in the deck, like blue. Red-blue actually looks really promising because you get to play Tetsuko, and Tetsuko is just a natural combo with all the creatures you want to be playing with Calamity anyway. And one of the problems with this deck is that you run a bunch of 1-power creatures into a bunch of 2 and 3 and 4 power creatures and they die, right? Like, you don't get that much extra damage sometimes off of Calamity because your creature is going to be dying in early and mid-combat steps, especially when you get to the mid-game. But if you had a card like Tetsuko, you wouldn't have that problem. You wouldn't be running him into a bunch of brick walls. You know, you'd be running him into guaranteed Calamity damage and guaranteed combat damage and guaranteed next turn combat damage too. So I actually really like the idea of Tetsuko, but I don't think that it's quite worth making this deck blue. Just because most of the good cards for the deck are red anyway, you might only splash for Tetsuko. You do have some good options like Terramander, Night Veil Sprite, Siren Storm Tamer, MC Herald, Fairy Duelist. There are good options in blue, but really I just wanted to keep the consistency as high as possible and make the deck work as fast as possible. And sometimes adding a second color isn't necessarily conducive to either of those philosophies. But another good idea would be to add white for Chance for Glory. I actually really think this is the spiciest thing you could possibly be doing with this deck. You know, sometimes you only need a second combat step to get as much damage off of Calamity as possible. So you just play, you know, Chance for Glory on your first main phase. You'll get a bunch of guaranteed crack-in damage from Cavalcade, but you gotta win, kid. You gotta win that turn. So I can see Chance for Glory being a really, really cool inclusion that could actually lead to fast wins, like turn 4 or 5 wins here, but in the end, I'm just not, again, sure that it's worth adding a second color no matter what the spice. Now here are your power rankings. Final score of 60. Pretty good for a deck that again is south of $20 on TCG Player right now. That's cresting 60, actually breaking the 60 seal. Pretty nice for a really, really inexpensive deck. And yeah, you could play mono red any number of ways right now, but this is one of the more fun ways, and it's actually not bad. Again, you expand your board kind of a lot with all the different token making cards in the deck. You've got a fair amount of burn in the deck, which just equals good reach. Cavalcade itself is good reach. You know, there's just a lot of cool stuff going on for this deck, even though it's kind of a basic mono red deck. There's a lot of spice added to it. You know, it doesn't feel so boring as kind of the average mono red deck does in this format right now. So give it a shot. It's actually also like $100 cheaper than the average mono red deck in the format right now too. And again, performs pretty well. You know, even if you don't even play a sideboard, you just play with some best of one, you're doing pretty good for yourself. But the sideboard, even though it looks like a bunch of random junk, you know, Diamond Mare, Lightning Mare, Dual Shot, what are we doing? Actually, these are pretty good cards in the format right now, so I want you to try this thing out. Even despite some low scores in certain categories, there's categories the deck really does not give a crap about. We're prioritizing speed and offense above all else, and the deck does those things really well. But yeah, guys, I guess that's it for now. So make sure you just click the first link in the description. Go over to TCG Playa. They sponsor my content. They're good people, but yeah. This is Waverly, we're calling her. It's from Joy Luck Club. It's a really good movie. But I also call her Frida sometimes because she's kind of got a mustache. But yeah, you've actually caught us in a pivotal moment right now because Ziggy is on the other side of that door. You can see his fat shadow right there on the right side And they've just been kind of like, hey girl, they've just been kind of standing off for the last half hour. Are you backing off, girl? Yeah, she likes to play with this cord. It's probably not the best thing in the world. But yeah, make sure you do all the other stuff too, guys. You know, like, subscribe, hit the bell for the notifications, share the video if that's what you want to do. And I guess I will catch you cats later. I'm Deb from the place. Thanks for watching, my wizards. Spread love and be kind. A little fuzzy butt at the end of the video for you. Here's the $10 patrons.